A federal judge in California yesterday struck down as unconstitutional the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, the military's ban on gay people serving openly in the military. The judge ruled that the policy violates service members' First Amendment rights to free speech, as well as their Fifth Amendment rights to due process. Judge Virginia Phillips also said she would issue an injunction to keep the government from enforcing what she ruled is a due process denying, free speech violating policy. Now, the Justice Department has not yet said whether it will appeal the judge's decision. The Justice Department spokesman did say that lawyers are reviewing the ruling. As for the commander-in-chief, well, he didn't have to say anything about it today. President Obama was not asked a single question about the ruling at today's press conference, which, frankly, I thought was weird. But the Justice Department may have, for its part, already tipped its cards a little bit on this issue. The Justice Department mounted a really bad defense in this case, so bad as to be almost non-existent. We learned this today not from the Justice Department, but from Judge Phillips in her 85-page decision. She noted on page 20 of that decision, quote, apart from the act itself and its legislative history, defendants, meaning the government, admitted no evidence and produced no witnesses. No witnesses, not a single one, except for the policy itself and its legislative history. That's the if it please the court equivalent of, hey, so we have this thing, and here's how we got this thing, and that's all we have to say about it. No witnesses, no, we don't have any other defense. Really, not much of a defense. And that not much of a defense did not really fly with Judge Phillips, who also in her ruling pretty much eviscerated the government's premise, the premise upon which Don't Ask, Don't Tell is based, specifically the part of the policy that contends that it would create an unacceptable risk to the high standards of morale, good order, and discipline and unit cohesion that are the essence of military capability. In other words, the law's purported justification is that the military would become incapable of getting things done if it were known, even merely suspected, that somebody in uniform might not be straight. To that purported justification for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Judge Phillips essentially said hogwash, for the simple fact that the military continues to send service members who are under investigation for violating Don't Ask, Don't Tell into combat while their cases are being investigated. Then, statistically, it tends to wait until they get back from combat before concluding that there's such a danger, oh my gravy, they're so dangerous, they must kick them out. On page 64 of the ruling, quote, it defies logic that the purposes of the act could be served by suspending the investigation during overseas deployments only to discharge a service member upon his or her return to a non-combat station. The effect of the act has been not to advance the government's interests of military readiness and unit cohesion, much less to do so significantly, but to harm that interest. If it's so dangerous to have openly gay people in combat, why, when we suspect people of being openly gay, do we stop trying to kick them out so they can go participate in combat? Judge Phillips' ruling is that gay and lesbian service members are not a threat to the military. They already serve in the military and in combat. The policy itself of kicking out capable men and women for no reason other than their sexuality, the ruling says that is actually the threat to America's military. In presenting its case, the plaintiffs called among their many witnesses Major Mike Almy. Major Mike Almy was discharged from the Air Force under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, even though he was asked, and he never told. After Major Almy's unit left Iraq, someone in the unit that replaced his discovered some of his private emails. Those emails then formed the basis of the Air Force's case against him. Major Almy shared his story with Judge Phillips at trial. She concluded in her ruling, quote, the court found Almy a credible, candid, and forthright witness. Mike Almy has also been generous enough to share his story with us on this show, and he joins us again tonight in the wake of this historic ruling. Mike, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. It's good to see you again.
You too. I know you were only one witness, but Judge Phillips writes about how losing you impacted your unit, how the squadron, in her words, fell apart without you, how important you were not only to the mission but to your troops. Do you feel any small piece of ownership for this big ruling?
Just one small part. Mine was just one of the stories. It certainly highlights how horrible this law is. My unit I had a great squadron, a fantastic team, and they were very capable, functioned very highly. And the unit cohesion and the morale suffered. The mission suffered after I was fired from my duty because it just had a it had a very negative effect on the unit. And that just goes to highlight all the other stories, the 14,000 or so service members, men and women, who've been thrown out under this law, and how much that has harmed our national security. And I think Judge Phillips really picked up upon that and really showed that in her decision.
Mike, there was one part of the ruling and one part of this overall case that I wanted to ask you about. It's not one that we've talked about a lot because I find it so distasteful that it's even being brought up. But Judge Phillips essentially debunks in her decision the idea that we can't have straight and gay people living and showering anywhere near each other. She wrote in her ruling, the act is not necessary to protect the privacy of service members because military housing quarters already provide sufficient protection for this interest. I know a large part of being cross-examined by the defense in this case meant you were asked to detail your sleeping arrangements throughout your military career.
Correct.
What was that like?
I was kind of shaking my head in wonder. This is what the Justice Department's argument was. They wanted to know how I showered and how I slept throughout my entire military career. And it just goes to highlight the paranoia and the outright homophobia that was evident in 1993 when Congress passed this law, and that was the sole point of their argument, was the privacy and the dreaded shower issue. And the Justice Department brought this up again, which really quite surprised me, and I think you highlighted this in your intro quite well. Their argument has not changed in 17 years. They did not call one single witness. They have not changed their argument, and yet how much has American culture, and certainly the military culture, changed in 17 years? There are so few private shower situations like that in the military. There are very rare instances of that. There are great amounts of privacy for the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that serve today. It's just such a non-issue that I'm quite surprised that this same argument, this tired argument, keeps being brought up again and again. It's quite clear that there are a lot of gay people in the military and have been throughout the 17 years of this policy, and we're already there. Yes, yeah. Yes.
Let me ask you about the Justice Department's defense here, because a lot of people are trying to figure out now if the Justice Department is going to appeal the ruling. If they didn't, it would be a huge deal, because Judge Phillips says she would issue an injunction to keep the government from enforcing Don't Ask, Don't Tell on the basis of this ruling. Was there anything about the Justice Department's rather weak defense in this case? As you say, no witnesses, not much of an argument. Was there anything that you think tipped their hand about whether or not they might make a decision here to not appeal?
I don't know. That's certainly the speculation and the guessing game that we're all participating in right now. It does put the administration and the Justice Department in a rather awkward position right now. The President, the Pentagon have all said, well, the Pentagon is studying how to implement repeal of this law. The President has publicly stated he wants to repeal it, that it harms national security, and he's directed his Pentagon to study this. The House has voted upon it. The Senate should vote upon it this month, hopefully, and yet the Justice Department now has the unenviable position of having to defend this law. So it will be interesting to see how the administration and the Justice Department responds to this. If they let the decision stand, if they appeal it, it's rather interesting.
At this point, they don't have to appeal. They had to defend it, but they don't have to appeal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Major Mike Almy. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
There's absolutely no reason for them to do so, yes. Mm-hmm.
Major Mike Almy discharged from the military because of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, but his testimony helped convince a federal judge in California that the law is unconstitutional, harmful, and in the judge's words, one that defies logic. Thank you for your service, Mike, your testimony in this. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me again, Rachel.